That's a good beat. That was lively. I like that. I've not had music like that coming up on stage before. It was kind of fun. Hey, thanks for having me here. This is kind of my first time to Southern Ohio. I have been to Cleveland and stuff like that, so I'm not really like up on all the rivalries, so hopefully that's not a bad thing. But I've enjoyed being here in Portsmouth. I am still full from my dinner at Rivers last night. Oh my word. Incredibly good, but are you kidding me? That is not small steak. That word small means something totally different now. So it's been absolutely wonderful, and thank you from my family back in Joplin for allowing me to come here. And thank you for those of you that even came yesterday and endured me for 3 hours. You are brave. And we also have another hour tonight. Let me just kind of orient a little bit this morning so that it's not so confusing. I'm not going to stand on here on this stage, talk about Revelation, and start predicting things. And if you were here yesterday, you would realize why that's the case. We talked about context. We talked about the fact that this letter, which it is, the New Testament are letters written from a real person to real people going through real issues. And when we looked at this letter of Revelation, we realized there is no difference. But the people of Revelation are going through conflict. Conflict with the Roman Empire, conflict inside of the church, conflict even with the Jews of the Roman Empire. They are struggling in this cosmic conflict that we have been struggling since Genesis 3, between God and between Satan. And one of the things I said was, more than prediction, Revelation wants to transform you. And so what I want to do this morning is I actually want to talk about the heartbeat of the book. Which is going to be difficult because for some of you, you're going to be going, well, but I want to know about the trumpets and I want to know about the seals. You can come tonight. It's going to be all a Q&A. I've just decided I'm going to grab the thing I had planned, and we're just going to have question and answer time because I think that's more fun, okay? But tonight, or this morning, what I want to do is I want to say, if you want to know the heartbeat of Revelation, it's this sermon. This is what Revelation's heart is beating towards. It is constantly trying to guide us towards. And let me just give you a hint. It has something to do with the first 5 words of the book. The revelation of Jesus Christ. It's always strange to me how that's controversial. Whenever I go places and I'm like, I'm not going to predict, I'm going to talk about Jesus. Why? Well, because that's what the book says it wants to talk about. That's why. And why is that disappointing? Oh, man, we don't get to predict. We just have to talk about Jesus. Yes, I'm sorry. We do. A little story time. I think I shared this story with you at lunch. It was funny, though. I was in Russia, and I was speaking on Revelation, and this guy named Boris, picture the quintessential Russian man, Boris. He wore one of those hats, had a huge goatee. And at the end of my sessions, we went to a question and answer time, and he was not happy with me. And he starts slamming his fist down on the table, and he's speaking in Russian, and the interpreter that's standing next to me goes about 2 lines and then stops interpreting. That's never a good sign. I was like, oh, you're censoring this. Okay. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm waiting, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening. Finally, literally 2.5, 3 minutes of him ranting. He stops. There's this pregnant pause. The interpreter looks at me, and he goes, he's saying if what you're saying is right, then Revelation is just like every other book in the New Testament. I said, tell him he's right. And then the interpreter looked at me and he goes, you want me to tell him that? I said, yeah, tell him that's exactly what I'm saying. It's strange to me when we come to a book like this, how we twist it and turn it. And part of what I was suggesting yesterday was this. It's because we don't want to deal with what we're staring at in the mirror. We'd rather find a way to hide from that. Transformation is way more difficult than prediction. We'd rather hide in prediction by kicking this book to the future. The reality is, though, Revelation wants to transform you now. It wants to transform you in the present. And the now is a lot more difficult to wrestle with than the future. The future is in some sense undefined and therefore safe. It's safe, especially if we can predict it. But the present, the pain we feel right now, the questions that we have in our mind right now, the secrets that we are covering over right now, give me anything to avoid that. Like Revelation has this really honest conversation with us, and I appreciate it. In the middle of the seals, in the middle of the trumpets, in the middle of the bowls, you hear this phrase or this insight constantly being repeated. Sometimes it's hard to see God. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's just like hard to sense him, to feel him. I mean, we're an Acts 2 movement in the Restoration Movement, Churches of Christ. Acts 2, Holy Spirit. We don't always know what to do with the Holy Spirit in our movement, though. But isn't it wild how 1/3 of the Trinity is living inside of us, and it can still be hard to see and feel and sense God sometimes? To believe that he's sitting right here with us. Or as Revelation would say, that he's walking amongst the lampstands, and the lampstands are the churches. Sometimes it's really stinking hard to see God, especially when pain comes on the scene. Man, I'll never forget the smell, the temperature, the voice of the doctor, where I'm sitting next to my wife and I'm holding her hand, and the doctor coldly looks at us and just says, your fetus has no heartbeat. And I was kind of taken aback, and I was like, I'm sorry, what did you say? And he kind of looks up from the sonogram and just looks back at us, and he just goes, your fetus has no heartbeat. At that point, tears are starting to kind of well up in my wife and I's eyes. And I looked at her, and I looked at him, and I said, are you saying my baby is dead? And he said, yes. And then he got up and walked out of the room. And I remember being in that moment going, what just happened? We thought we were in just for a routine checkup. We had no idea anything was going on. We'd already had our firstborn, so we'd gone through this baby thing before. This was new. And in that room and in that space, let me just tell you, it was really stinking hard to see God. To say that he was with us, to say that he was present beside us, to actually believe his name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. That was tough. And sometimes Christians just make it worse on you in moments like this. Sometimes in moments of this type of a pain, the things that Christians say and the things that they try to do in order to frankly avoid this difficult reality in their own lives, it's hard to see God. They will do things that just make it worse. And you find yourself having to minister to them even though you were wishing they would minister to you. The next day I was down in our basement, we were finishing it. It was kind of roughed in, and I'm not handy. But if you show me where to point a nail gun, I can shoot it. And that was basically what was happening. So I'm down there, and I'm actually working beside my growing up, he was one of my spiritual fathers. He super handy, he's a carpenter, and we're working, and I just became overwhelmed after he asked the question, so hey, how you doing? And we hadn't told anybody yet. And I said, actually, yesterday we found out we lost our baby. And he goes, well, you know what that means, don't you? And I kind of looked over at him, and I was like, no. He goes, well, it means God has something better for you in store. I put down the nail gun. And I actually just excused myself and said, I need to go to the restroom. Because what I wanted to do is to look at him and say, oh, okay, please explain to me what is better than my child living. Go. But I thought, nah, I'll love you in a way in which I wish you were loving me. I'll preserve your dignity, and I'll just go collect myself. I wish it was better that next Sunday, because this all happened on a Wednesday, Thursday. I wish whenever I went to church and I was talking to the people that were close, that they actually engaged it like we lost something. I found this very fascinating. How these are the same Christians that, boy, when they get to the voting booth, they are pro-life. But when you lose a baby to a miscarriage, they act like you didn't lose anything. Like, what is that? If life begins at conception and you have a miscarriage, it's called a death. So why don't Christians respond that way? Instead, I literally had one of my friends say to me, well, it's probably a lot harder on Sarah. She actually had something inside of her, but you never really met the baby. It's like, what is going on here? And I'll be honest, in moments like that, I'm going, I don't hear or see God in this space. This is strange to me. And I don't know if in your pain you have the same responses. Maybe you frankly just have different gifts or even are holier than me. But I'll be honest, there's been a lot of moments in my life where it just did not seem like I could find God anywhere I looked. No matter where I searched, no matter where I went, it seemed like everything around me is crumbling. And I'm supposed to pretend with a smile that God is with me. If He's with me, how come I don't feel it? If He's with me, how come I don't see it? If He's with me, shouldn't things be a little different? I didn't get off on the right foot with God early on in my life. I'm not going to go into super detail with this. I do this in the book, but I was molested from the ages of 6 to 11, multiple people, multiple locations. I also grew up in the church, so there's this weird tension I had of feeling alone and abused, but also simultaneously reading the scriptures about how God says, let the little children come to me. The kingdom of heaven is like one of these. Or even reading passages like, God is with you, even to the very end of the age. And I'm like, well, where were you when I was 6? What happened there, Emmanuel? And if you were there, why didn't you do something? That would have been helpful. If we're not honest with these questions and the way that pain attacks us, you not only won't understand Revelation, you'll never understand the good news. You won't understand the revelation of Jesus Christ. You will actually look at what happens to Jesus or what Jesus says, and you will misread it. You will misinterpret it. You will actually accuse God of things that aren't even really true. But the reality is this: we have to begin with the honesty of the Psalms, which say, man, sometimes it is just really stinking hard to find God, to see Him. Because the truth is, sometimes our eyes play tricks on us. Mark chapter 15, verses 33 through 34, to me is one of the key passages of the book of Revelation. Jesus has been on the cross for several hours now. He's starting to approach His final breath, and creation starts its grieving even before the Creator has died. As a matter of fact, in Mark 15:33, it says, at noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. It's hard to see in the dark. Darkness comes over all of the land, the whole land, until 3 p.m. as creation is preparing the death of the Creator. And then verse 34 says this: at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out with some of His last breaths in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's a weird thing to record in a book of hope. That's a strange thing to record at this moment that we celebrate and even decorate our churches with. And over the years, this belief or this teaching has arisen that in that moment, God turned His back on the suffering of the afflicted one. That in that moment, He abandoned Jesus on the cross as He dealt with the pain of sin. And my thought was, man, And that's a God called love. Frankly, when I was growing up and I heard that teaching, I had this question go through my mind. So in my darkest hour, is he going to abandon me too? In my moment of greatest need, is he going to go, I'm sorry, the sin's just too much. I got to turn my back. Like what? Is sin so powerful that you have to run away from it when it comes into your presence? Is sin have the upper hand on God so much so that his holiness is like, yo, cooties, like sin? If that's the case, what was happening at the beginning of Job whenever Satan walks into his presence? God didn't run. I'll give you a hint. Sin flees, not the opposite. God's not allergic to sin. And yet somebody can quote this and say, well, then explain this to me. The only explanation I have for this is this. More than a declaration of God's absence, Jesus is singing a song. That's what he's doing. This is literally the opening lines of Psalm 22, a psalm of David. A psalm that Jesus probably sang when he was a kiddo, helping his dad out in the carpentry shop. A song that Jesus probably sang in his worship services. A song that Jesus knew so well that in his darkest moment, he began to hum it. He began to sing it. My dad's a hospice chaplain up in the St. Louis area, so he works. His job is to be present with people as they're passing from this life to the next. That's his job. My dad is a super patient man. He's a man that actually, it's all he longs for is just to be present. And frankly, whenever people are on their deathbed, that's what they need more than anything, not answers. They need people just to be present. My dad told me, he said, one of the things that's really interesting, he goes, even when I'm dealing with people that have no faith, they always start singing childhood songs. He goes, and the number one song I've heard, Christian, non-Christian, is Amazing Grace. He goes, I don't prompt it. They just start to sing the songs that mean the most to them when they're on their deathbed. And I find it interesting that on Jesus' deathbed, he chooses this song, which doesn't start off super well. This is Psalm 22, Song of David. Starts off, my God, why have you forsaken me? What? How many of our songs start off like that? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish. My God, I cry out by day, but you don't answer me. I cry out by night, but I find no rest. I love the honesty of that. I grieve that we don't have that honesty enough in the church. There's beauty in the heart of the man after God's own heart, David, when he says, I'm going to start a song and it's going to be on a very discordant chord. It's going to be saying, you have abandoned me, so it seems. What I find also interesting, though, is in verse 3, you get this emphatic and yet. He starts off the first two verses, he's like, I feel abandoned, and then he says, and yet, you are enthroned as the Holy One. That might be a reason why, right after God really comes at the churches in Revelation 1 through 3, that we're in a throne room in Revelation 4. You are the enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. I mean, in you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried out, and they were saved. In you they trusted, and they were not put to shame. It's interesting. The song begins with abandonment, but verses 3 through 5 sound like, but God's someone you can kind of trust even if your eyes deceive you. I can't help but ask the question, okay, so why is Jesus singing this song? Verse 6, he starts the cycle over, abandonment. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since the Lord delights in him so much. Abandonment. Verse 9. And yet. Why is Jesus singing this song? And yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. And I almost can hear David whispering at the end of that verse, there is no one to help but you. Why is Jesus singing this psalm on the cross? It might not be because of the way it begins. It might be because of the way it ends. Look at verse 16. Verse 16 is wild. I can't even tell if I'm in the halls of David singing a song or if I'm at the foot of the cross. Psalm 22:16, written hundreds of years before Jesus, says this: dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. Why is Jesus singing this psalm? All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. Why is Jesus singing this song? It's not because of the way it begins. It's because he knows how the story ends. He understands that there's more to the story than the eye can see. That in this moment, as all of creation is grieving, it is tempting to say, God must have abandoned the suffering of the afflicted one at this moment. And then Jesus says, let me sing you a song. As a matter of fact, look at verses 22 through 24. David starts to get a little giddy here. He says, oh, I will declare your name to my people. In the assembly, I will praise you, even in the midst of his pain. Even in the midst of what seems like abandonment. You who fear the Lord, praise him. Now he's going to give us commandments. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him. Revere him, all you descendants of Israel. Listen to verse 24. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. Why is Jesus singing this song? He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help. You see, over the years, if I was up here and I was trying to be as honest as I could be, I could not say I didn't struggle with seeing God. Because when pain comes, it is difficult. But one of the things I've learned by standing in fire after fire and furnace after furnace is this: God never stops writing his story. He never puts down the pen. He never ends the song prematurely. God always continues to write a story, and what I find interesting is he wastes nothing of my story in that story. All of the pain, all of the joy, all of the healing, all of the failure. In God's story, he goes, no, I'll use it all. His hope and desire is not for us to experience pain. He created Genesis 1 and 2 without that type of torment. And when he recreates it in Revelation 21, he says, there will be no more pain or mourning or crying, for the old order of things has passed away. He doesn't will the pain, but he refuses to not use it. He redeems it. He makes it new. And the only way that we can embrace this, the only way we can actually intersect with this movement of God is to learn how to sing like Christ did on the cross. Listen to how the psalm ends. I think more than the beginning, Jesus had this in mind. Verse 29. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who can't even keep themselves alive. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn Here are the last four words. He has done it. And that's how the psalm ends. Why is Jesus singing this song? In his darkest moment, he understands that sometimes it's just really hard to see God. It's hard to sense him, to feel him, to sit with him. And frankly, a lot of the times the church people make things worse because they'll usually sit at the bottom of the cross and hurl insults. I mean, you talk about abandonment. Where were even his disciples outside of John? And in between the breaths, as he's trying to breathe on the cross, he looks down and sees his weeping mother as all of the Jewish leaders are mocking him. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross, then we'll believe in you. Yet Jesus knew if he came down from the cross, he would cease to be the Son of God. And moments like that is incredibly difficult to see God, and yet Jesus looks at us and says, let me teach you how to sing. To sing a story in which God never stops writing. He never puts down the pen. He is constantly unfolding. And here's one of the most amazing things that Revelation teaches us as well as the rest of the Bible teaches us. God not only never stops writing his story, you play an important part in that story. And that to me is dumbfounding. What can I offer an infinite God? Couldn't he do this without me? And God says, if I did, I would cease to be the God I've revealed myself to be. Do this without you? That was never the plan. Even back in Genesis 2, it wasn't the plan for God to do without us. This is one of the most humble, vulnerable, exposing moments of who our God is whenever he creates Adam on the sixth day in Genesis 2. And then God stands by Adam and says, why don't we parade every animal so that you can find a suitable companion? God, you're standing right next to me. What do you mean I need a suitable companion? And he goes, oh no, we're going to do this all together. And then it's even crazier because then Adam gets through all the animals God created and he's like, you actually didn't create one that was suitable. And God goes, sleep. And then he creates woman. We have a God that is not only more present than what we assume, but Revelation teaches us that the veil between heaven and earth is much thinner than we assumed. Revelation chapter 1 has this powerful image I've already alluded to. John is on the island of Patmos, and he sees this one like a son of man coming down. And it says in verse 13 that the one like a son of man is walking among the lampstands. And then in verse 20, so that we don't miss it, Jesus says, let me define for you what the lampstands are. The 7 lampstands are the 7 churches, which means God is walking amongst us. Would that change the way that we treated each other if we really believed Jesus was walking amongst us? I ask my students, I teach 18 to 22-year-olds most of the time, although that's starting to shift now. And one of the things I try to tell them is I say, you have to understand when you bow your knee to Jesus, you don't get to say what you're worth anymore. He tells you what you're worth. You don't get to look in the mirror and say, and criticize, and critique, and put down, and bring shame. You don't get to do that anymore. He looks at you and says, you are my daughter, you are my son, and I am not only willing to die for you, I am going to be with you regardless of what you encounter. We get to be a part of the story, but we don't get to dictate the story. And yet at times it's really hard to see, and I think that's the reason why at the end of all 7 letters in Revelation 2 and 3, he has this cryptic call to the churches. He says, to him who has ears, let him hear what the Spirit is saying. Sometimes it's hard to see God. And yet, he reveals himself to be a God that never puts down the pen. So here's the challenge today. Stop hiding in the shadows or in the future. Step into his light and bring your pain and bring your joy and bring your successes and bring your failures to the foot of the cross. Because at the foot of the cross, depression belongs. At the foot of the cross, abuse belongs. At the foot of the cross, all of the joys, all of the highs, all of the lows, all of the pain belongs. And don't be surprised when you're in that moment that you find yourself humming a song like Jesus did. Let me pray a blessing over you.